good afternoon, and thank you for sticking with us through a long afternoon of Politico Sustainability Week. And for those of you joining online, I'm Gabriel Gavin, I'm a reporter with Politico, and we're going to be talking over the next 35 minutes about hydrogen, which is probably the technology that in European energy history has had the most abrupt explosion of investment, one where the focus has the expectations have kind of never been higher. And I mean, you really do speak to people and you get the full range of views, from hydrogen is the silver bullet that's going to fix the economy, that's going to bring about decarbonization, all the way through to this is a scam. And I think we'll probably end up somewhere in the middle of that this afternoon. But I think we'll try and keep things to a tight 35 minutes and let you get outside for some cocktails and the obligatory mingling. That's the benefit of doing the last one of the day, huh? But no, I wanted to introduce Michaela Holl, who's a senior associate for the EU Green Deal at Agora Energiewende, Joaquin Rodriguez from the Spanish energy company Moebe, Director of Hydrogen and Clean Power, and Annemie Turtelboom, a former Belgian Minister and Dean of Chamber 2, Investment for Cohesion, Growth and Inclusion at the European Court of Auditors. And on that note, I'll start with you actually, Annemie, because for anyone who isn't acutely aware, the European Court of Auditors published a report a few weeks ago, a month ago, 2 months ago, that effectively said that the EU's ambitions to produce and import 10 million tons, import 10 million tons, produce of hydrogen, green hydrogen, by the end of the decade was vastly overblown, and that these were politically directed targets rather than scientifically directed targets. I mean, for me, from the outside, that's an extraordinary condemnation of what Ursula von der Leyen and her team have been saying, which is that hydrogen is going to be a transformative technology and that we have to hit those targets if we're going to go through the green transition. So is hydrogen overblown?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think I will bring the most uplifting message here tonight, but okay, someone has to do it. So the title of our report was actually "The legal framework has been mostly adopted, but time for a reality check." Because indeed what we have seen is that the targets are more political, inspirational, but we don't see what about the maths. Can it materialize? You already highlighted the 10 million import, the 10 million tons on production. But what we have seen is that actually it's even not clear that the 10 million own production will materialize. We have seen that we end up at 2.7 million. So, and then you are wondering, it's always very easy. We see it on a regular basis, because we made at the Court of Auditors, we also made a report. We are now busy with the report on microchips. We made a report on the production of batteries. We saw it on the 5G. There are a lot of targets, a lot of ambitions, and as such, that is good. Yeah. It's a good thing. We are all the time. It's good that the Commission is ambitious. But at a certain moment, if you all the time don't meet your targets, then you have a credibility problem at a certain moment. Yeah. And we see now also on the hydrogen that the Commission has an ambition, a clear ambition, a very inspirational political goal, but we don't see it materialize. And if we then go on the other level, then we see, okay, the Commission has this ambition, but then you also have the member states. And then we are seeing, how is this aligned? And then we have to say, there is not all the time an alignment within the Commission, because the different DGs do have from time to time other priorities. And if we then add up the layer of the member states, then we add up some more complexity, like, apologies again for the audience that I'm not here for the most positive message, but at this moment,
used to it by now after a day of slightly depressing messages.
So maybe this will go earlier for the cocktail you announced. But no, having said that, very seriously, we see that there are these ambitions, but we don't see it materializing. And that is unfortunate, because we also reward in our We also say in our report that hydrogen is crucial for some, if you see about the steel industry and you want to have, I think the next commission will put at the corner of their ambitions not only the Green Deal that was maybe the previous commission, but also the industrial policy. And we call it internally at the core, from time to time you have that trilemma. You have the ambitions on the side of the Green Deal, you have the industrial policy, and you don't want to be too dependent of third countries. And these three aspects, what you could call a trilemma, are not well enough aligned, not at all different levels.
And if we take probably all just, oh, there we go. If we, I mean, let's take a step back on it. So I think there's an expectation that hydrogen as a clean burning fuel is going to be important for hard to decarbonize sectors, right? So if you want to do, if you know, not everything can be electrified, sometimes you need a molecule, huh? I mean, there is a broad agreement that hydrogen, I think even between those of you on the stage right now, that hydrogen has an application. Joaquin, I mean, you're in the business of making green hydrogen. It's obviously a huge part of your strategy going forward. What role do you see that hydrogen having? And, you know, are there enough use cases yet?
So, yes, of course, we are in this business, so we see a case, we see a business case, which is important, because we are a privately owned company. We do invest where we see an opportunity, because we serve customers, but also we need to pay back our equity, our capital to our investors. And we need to be realistic. So yes, there are very ambitious targets, but we already see some very clear mandates, particularly where we operate, which is in the heavy transportation. Which, by the way, we discussed also this morning, is very intensive in CO2 emissions. And I remember this is all about reduction of CO2 emissions.
And I'm interested, do you agree with Annemie that setting an ambitious target and not meeting it kind of demoralizes the entire sector, and you may as well not have set an ambitious target? Or do you think that having that level of ambition from the, at an EU level is positive?
We think it's positive if it's followed by clear steps. So if it's just an ambition and nothing happens, then demoralizes everybody. But if you see then a plan, even if the real number is half of that ambition, it is good. So we need that the market is created, and the market is demand and supply and a price. So we can start making deals. So in the sector that we operate, which is transportation, particularly heavy transportation, we see very clear mandates on maritime, on aviation, and we think that on road it is coming. We need to see the transposition of RED III obligations at the national level. And these targets are set in quantities or percentages and penalties. So, and I come back to the ETS system, no? CO2 allowances, that in the beginning were a lot of them free, and then partially people had to pay. Prices were very low. They were targeting the electrical generation mainly through coal, so they were meant to reduce coal production, but the price of CO2 emissions was very low. Only when CO2 went up by 2021 to significant level, then coal plants started to be shut down. And we saw that in Spain, in my home country. Basically, all coal plants are now in the decommissioning. And this 20 years ago was impossible. So it was an ambitious target, perhaps too early, but it happened, no, in the end. So in the maritime sector, we see this, and we are getting prepared to supply low carbon or e-fuels, if needed, by our customers in the ports where we operate. And what we see is the opportunity is massive. Because when we have a plan, it's well known, we call it the positive motion. We have 2 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity as a target. We are building that in phases, and we are servicing our customers in the Algeciras Bay, where there is a big port.
I just want to bring in Michaela on that. I mean, obviously, with new technologies coming through, there's always a huge amount of optimism. Europe does need something like hydrogen to push it through the green transition. But does the market for this exist? Do you think, and if not, what needs to change for that to happen?
There will be a market, as the previous speaker has said. I don't find it so I would like to take the focus a bit away from the target. And because even 2 years before, we looked into it and came to the conclusion even 2 years earlier, that we don't see these amounts. That they are more than double what currently is used in Europe for hydrogen, and that includes byproducts, which we don't even need to replace. So I think this is a great moment that reality kicks in. But it's not the only thing, because actually the Commission has done a quite good job on everything else. And I believe it was even a representative from your company who said, if someone asks me, do you want to go to the US or do you want to go to the EU? I would choose the EU, because they looked at supply and demand, and you need both sides to create a market. Yeah. The auctions went much better than anyone would have hoped for. The Commission did
talking about the hydrogen bank auctions.
The hydrogen bank auctions, exactly. They went in a record time established. They were much better than anyone had hoped for. So there's a lot in place.
But that's still not an organic, real market, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the reason the hydrogen bank has to exist is because there aren't organic buyers who want to buy green hydrogen at a price that is competitive. But do you see that changing?
What changing?
Do you see that we're moving towards a period where actually green hydrogen can exist as a market without huge levels, billions of European taxpayer subsidies?
No, and to be honest, there is a gap in price which will continue to exist. In our recent research, we saw that until the mid-40s, green hydrogen will be more expensive than others. You need money, but, combining target and our restricted amounts of money, we have to be smart. Yeah. So we have to really give it to where it matters.
And this is kind of the key question with. I mean, I'm sure there'll be people sitting in the audience who think like hydrogen, it doesn't affect me. But this is one of the largest investments that the European Union is making in terms of energy. I mean, we're talking billions of euros over the potential course of, what you've just said, another 2 decades. I mean, Annemie, is this a wise investment at this level?
Well, if it's a wise investment or not, as a Court of Auditors, we don't do politics. We just saw at a certain moment that more than 18 billion euros our funds are put in the hydrogen. And I think what you have said, it is more, every transition, then the price is always more expensive. So if it's a political priority, I think it is legit to say, I will spend funds on it. Yeah. But what we have seen in our reports is actually that the funds are widely spread. They're coming from different sources, from cohesion funds, for RRF funds. It's not always clear how the member states need to prove how they are meeting a milestone, whether it's aligned with each other. Yeah. We also have seen that 93% of the IPCEI projects are going to 4 member states. So take into account also what the Draghi report is saying about the internal market, that you need to make sure that there is not a competition starting inside Europe, because then you are actually further away between the different member states, because if you have 93% of the projects going to 4 member states, is this what we want to have? Is this the result what you want to have? We also have seen that there is quite a difference between the estimate of a cost, for example, from the European Commission, and then on the contrary, Germany, who's calculating costs differently. So there are quite some loose ends. And I think if you spend 18.8 billion euros on such a project and such a technology because it's important, and you need to make sure that everyone is looking in the same direction, not only the Commission but also the member states.
And that once we've allocated that money, that it's being spent properly in a way that actually builds a market. I mean, Håkon, in your experience, is the money being made available through the hydrogen bank, through other kind of investment programs? Is that money actually incentivizing investment? Is it incentivizing the actual production of hydrogen? Is it being used wisely?
I think it's partially yes, but as said, the money should be allocated to those projects that matter.
Mm-hmm. If I may, for example, I think in the first auction, not one project for steel. Yeah. For example,
and some people just
as good as the mechanism was, but still.
It's my understanding that several of the companies that won in the first hydrogen auction may not actually end up producing hydrogen.
Exactly, they were allocating money to projects that may not be real, and people that were, in fact, and we received proposals selling those projects just right after receiving the subsidy. So this is something to avoid in next rounds.
So there's a little bit of a hydrogen cowboy industry.
A little bit. So we think that money should be allocated to those projects that create the market. So big projects that help creating the infrastructure to connect producing regions with demanding regions. And when those infrastructures are there, more projects will then connect. Otherwise, you are just giving money to a project in the middle of nowhere, waiting for a pipe to be built. Nobody wants.
And we are waiting for the pipes to be built in many cases, right? I mean, we're incentivizing production, we're subsidizing purchase, but there doesn't seem to be much of a focus on getting hydrogen from, Spain, where Moebe do most of their work, to Germany, where heavy industry is going to want it. I mean, Michele, is that kind of pan-European hydrogen market, is that a pipe dream, literally?
Well, I think it's a pipe dream if you take the current gas map and think that hydrogen will play exactly the same role and you place it one by one. Then it's a pipe dream. But it doesn't have to be. Like the infrastructure planning was done on the repower target. So we might have to have a look at that again. And then what he said, look at where the industry clusters are that need it most and try to get, try to prioritize those clusters, and then you have the infrastructure. But it will not work if you think that every use can be replaced and there will be a pipeline going to every use. That will not happen, I think.
Or, if I may say, we talk a lot about subsidies, but there are some regulatory, let's say, tweaks that could be thought to improve significantly the cost of hydrogen production. And we are neglecting. I think now we have the time to think about those.
Yeah.
For instance, we discussed earlier on transmission tariffs. In Spain, we have a lot of curtailment because a lot of solar PV is produced at the same time. There are not enough storage units to store that energy, to use it later. But for hydrogen production, the storage of energy is not allowed unless it's behind the meter, so at the hydrogen.
And why is that?
We don't know why.
This is just regulation for the sake of regulation.
Probably. Well, it was done in pieces, so now it's the time to connect everything and to make it happen for the system, for the entire system. So other things like additionality criteria, which is good. You require additional wind farms to be built, but then the access to the grid of those wind farms is not permitted at the same time as the hydrogen. So there's a project-on-project risk. You're forced to buy from a new built wind farm that you don't know if it will get connection to the grid or not. So if done properly, then you can contract the electricity at much lower cost. You may store it when not needed in a battery that is located where it's best for the system. Yeah. And then you can produce hydrogen safely 24 hours a day, which then increases the load factor of the electrolyzer, reduces proportionally the cost.
And that would be using hydrogen in a way that's different to how it was originally conceived, right? When the European Union began the process of building these policy frameworks and setting these targets. I mean, when and how should Brussels look again at these production and import targets, and where do you? I'm going to press you to. I'm not going to ask you to pull a number out of the air, but what level? How overblown is our ambition at the moment?
Well, quite, because if you think about the 10 million tons on production and we think it will be 2.7, then you can say you are maybe at 27%.
And that is your forecast?
That was actually at the moment that we made the report what came out. So you are far from the ambition. And then I don't talk about the 10 million tons that was actually foreseen for import, where there is actually not really a plan from where it will come and how it will materialize. So I'm only talking about the own production. But what I wanted to add on the funding as well is also you have the time period. We have seen throughout our report that it takes quite a long period before you can have the funding or before like an IPCEI project is approved by the Commission. If it takes between 3 to 5 years between the pre-notification and the implementation of a project, then you lose also crucial time. So I think there is also room for improvement. equivalent. Secondly, I think the regulatory framework that the Commission made was quite fast on track, but then the implementation definitions on what is hydrogen took 3 years. That is time actually you cannot lose, because there is a lot, indeed, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And it's crucial, because if you look at your steel industry, or to give one example, and you want to keep the industry in Europe, then you cannot wait. And you have, on the other hand, these Green Deal targets, then you cannot wait, like you cannot lose 3 to 5 years, because then maybe they make a calculation, they see what's happening in the US, they see what's happening in China, and they make maybe another investment decision.
Yeah.
And that is also the reason why we said in one of our recommendations, there should be, as soon as possible, what we call a reality check. And the reality check should actually almost happen on a constant basis, because we are not on an island. The big companies are looking what is happening, like, for example, what the US is doing with their Inflation Reduction Act, and now we will see after the elections what else will come on the market. So what we are saying is funds better targeted, faster having clear guidelines and definitions to implement the large regulation.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, faster decision between a pre-notification and an implementation.
I mean, you're asking the EU to do lots of things the EU is not very good at. Make decisions, make them quickly, communicate with capitals. Mick, did you want to come in on that?
Well, you asked for a number. The number is there. He said already it's the legally binding targets in the renewables that will be covering aviation and maritime and industry. That adds up to circa 4 million tons. There's no, you know, that's
where we'll be.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
If I may add,
yeah, please do.
On top of this, I must say that we have customers that want to go beyond these mandates. So there are customers that are willing to pay this extra premium at a reasonable level to go beyond and to really show to their customers that they are complying. Why this? For instance, we talk about maritime transportation. What is the cost of the fuel in the good that is being transported in a big container ship? It's nothing. So the cost of the transportation is the ship, the crew, the port, the taxes, and then the fuel is a minor component divided with hundreds of thousands of goods, whether cell phones or whatever you are bringing in this big container ship, is nothing. So these companies want to pay this premium.
Yeah.
But they need also certainty that this is happening. They need the port authorities to be ready to operate on these e-fuels. So the thing is, if you can make these minor changes, which are very relevant, to reduce the cost of what matters, which is the OPEX, the cost of producing hydrogen is mainly the electricity component. It's not the electrolyzer.
Well,
then you can make a price that is suitable for a market to happen.
I mean, I want to come in on that question about electrolyzers, because this seems to be an area where, you know, the EU put the regulation in place very early, set up the ambition to produce and buy hydrogen, and there was an opportunity to kind of really own the electrolyzer market. And then along came the US and the Inflation Reduction Act. Chinese manufacturing ramped up. Do you think that the EU can and will continue to be a place where electrolyzers are made, or are we going to be at the point where we've set a target, buy Chinese or American-made electrolyzers, and those jobs just go?
I mean, it's not for me to decide what is the industrial policy.
Don't look at me.
But I must say,
your
we are
electrolyzers,
incentivizing, if we are giving subsidies for electrolyzers to be built, I think that Europe should.
And for you, there's a competitive case to be made to buy European electrolyzers?
I think for the moment, I mean, when we start and we want to look at safety and the guarantees and how to operate it, it makes sense to have the teams in place, because do the maintenance of an electrolyzer is not easy if you do it remotely. Said that, of course, that should be an industrial priority, of course.
I mean, the Commission has now reacted relatively fast and has adjusted the resilience. And I think that's a fair thing. You know, if you spend public money, we know we are in a tough global race. I think you can work with that. From a technology point of view, I'm not an electrolyzer expert, but what I heard is that what you want an electrolyzer to be is also flexible. And they didn't have to be so far. So a bit like when it comes to PV technology, you know, where Europe is leading a bit in making the things more efficient, I can definitely see there is something. And we already both said what you need to scale up, because they haven't been produced on scale yet, is a guaranteed market. We have this guaranteed market. That's what they want. That's also why they defend these policies. So I think Europe, it's going to be tough, but this is an early phase of this technology, so I believe that we will be able to manage, that Europe can maintain a role. And, you know, that's just last sentence. I guess it will be a mix, you know, you don't want to be 100% dependent on something, but we can also not afford to not have anything from outside either, nor do we want it.
Yeah.
And I think this fair share should be able to be organized. That's how I see it.
Did you want to come in on that?
No, because we are.
I was going to say I didn't want to push you to make a political
because
point.
we are not policymakers. But what we clearly saw in our report is you have on the one hand the Commission and the member states, you have the funding on the market, you have the framework, you have the definitions. And on the other hand, you have the industry, and both need to meet each other. And that's what we have seen. There is no single point of contact. And I think that is something in a Europe where we are united in diversity.
What would a single point of contact look like? Sorry.
Well, that, for example, if you are at a certain moment a company and you want to have information, or you want to have the funding, or you want to have, and then you are looking at, you have cohesion funds, you have RRF funds, you have different funds, then you have the national money, where actually the Commission often doesn't have a clue how much national money is put on the table by the member states. Then you have the regulatory framework of the national member states, and it could be very helpful if you're a private company that, you know, I go to this place and they will figure out, or they will help me where I can find the right funding, what is actually the framework, what is the national legislation, and how can I walk through this everything that is actually put at the disposal. But if you don't find it when it's put at your disposal, or it takes too long, then it's actually a missed opportunity, or you don't get to be in a positive mood. Then you don't get the most out of what you put on the market, or what you offer.
And because there may well be money available at various levels and through various schemes. And with the IRA in the US, there's a one-stop shop. It's no red tape. But
the red tape still comes.
In the US?
Yeah, of course. They still need to have exactly the same rules.
But they don't seem to have very much of a policy framework in place, right? It just seems that there's money being made available. Individual states are kind of making tax breaks for people to set up manufacturing, etc.
Yeah, it's a different way. No, they work via tax breaks. They don't have an ETS, and they don't have this full framework that was a bit, I think you used the term organically grown. I think that's what Europe has done. We've been developing these policies so it's a different approach. But it's not that there's no red tape. They are at the moment doing exactly the same job. And it, funnily enough, takes also years, like in Europe.
In the US, you mean?
Yeah. It's been 2 years they are discussing. They come to the same conclusion. That it's very complicated, but you need to regulate. So please don't say there is no red tape.
I don't mean to let the Americans off the hook for the bureaucracy. But I mean, has this been Moebe's experience as well in terms of it's difficult to navigate the incentive structures put in place?
I think, it's difficult to navigate, but it's not impossible. But it's time to revise and review these rules. What we say about the US is, yes, there is a very simple incentive scheme, but there is no demand being created. So then you see a lot of people say, okay, I can produce cheaply, but I want to export into Europe. Because in the US, I don't find any off-taker. In Europe, we have a more balanced approach. And now we are thinking, what about the infrastructures? Which projects should come first? In Spain, we have plenty of renewable power. We have a lot of empty space. Prices of electricity are becoming more and more competitive, sometimes even zero or negative prices. So if we think ahead of 10 years in time, we see that hydrogen will have a very relevant role. And if Europe can now fix these things, I don't know if it will be 4 million or 5 or 10 million, but once you kick off, then the market starts to develop. And this is what we need to kick off the market right now, not to think of what happens in 10 years' time.
No, and that's, I think, the reason also why a reality check can be very helpful, because then it can see where are the gaps in the system to really to help to match the industry with the funding that are there, maybe to see the gaps in your framework, and also to see how the coordination between the member states and the Commission can be improved. And if you bring this more together, that's the reason why we are saying there is no one-stop shop. That can help, because when we were talking to the industry, they were saying the rules are still too complex, are still too strict, but that are things who are like solvable.
Yeah.
It's not when we have a critical report, it's not because we don't believe in it, because we also say in our report that it will be crucial to do this green transition. You will need the hydrogen for certain aspect of your industry if you want to keep them in Europe. And so I think there is room for improvement. Okay, there is always room for improvement, but there are a lot of opportunities to and that's the reason why we, although we are critical, we always come with recommendations to improve the situation.
I mean, the ideal critical friend of auditors.
Exactly.
Huh? I mean, if there was one thing that you really wanted to see improved in the next Commission mandate, in this Commission mandate, what would it be?
For me, it would be matching the Green Deal goals with your industrial policy. That is, for me, crucial, and that you will have to do in certain aspects of your Green Deal. I don't say what it should be, but you need to bring both, more aligned both together.
Would you agree with that? Yeah, absolutely. I will be more precise in what I need, but I would say if I have to write a letter to the three kings, now coming to year end, I would ask first to give the money to those projects that are for real and that make matter, the big projects that really can create the market, and then fix a couple of things like this storage thing. It's very relevant because we have a lot of curtailment, so allow hydrogen to use storage wherever in the system, and also give priority to the wind and solar projects that have PPAs with the electrolyzers, because that's the only way to meet the additionality and the time correlation criteria. Only with that you can improve the market and make it happen very quickly.
I mean, it's been a nuclear-heavy afternoon, but for you, do you think there's a role for pink hydrogen or nuclear-produced hydrogen? Is that something that you'd like to see included in some of the definitions?
We have 3 minutes left, and you raise pink hydrogen.
Yes, yeah, and with a German on the panel as well, it's a controversial one. But in a word, I mean, do you think that the definition of hydrogen is too narrow?
I would only ask for the additionality criteria to be applied in any case. I mean, if you use existing nuclear, you're stealing away existing electricity production from the grid. So additional nuclear, I mean, that's a good debate, but should be additional.
Yeah, we have also low carbon fossil-based hydrogen, and on that,
Do you mean blue hydrogen with carbon capture?
Exactly, and on that, I believe I will keep it short because time's running. I think will also have to be a reality check to what extent they can help Europe to become more energy independent and also reduce emissions, because I mean that's why we pay all this money for. You asked one thing, and for me it would be the prioritization for the sectors that need hydrogen, that you really make that consistent. Steel, fertilizer, aviation, maritime, and blending. Remember the discussion on blending? By now people have understood that there's not so much champagne that we will be able to put it into the grid. And I think that message can still be made stronger. So then you have the steel plant that knows it's coming. And then I guess just also to not forget that there are other solutions. You can also electrify many things in the industry. I think that maybe that should also be part of the bigger picture. Not everyone will need hydrogen.
No. So it's about reining in the ambition,
exactly.
targeting the money to where it can be used best, and limiting the applications to the things that we really need hydrogen for, right? I mean, I think I have to thank you for an explosive conversation on this. Someone from Hydrogen Europe will come on stage and tackle me if I make Hindenburg jokes, but I think it's been a really useful and interesting discussion, and I think we've kind of answered that question of is there too much hype and what's the way forward? I'd like to ask everyone to join me in thanking our panelists, and also just on a personal note, as this is my last session of Sustainable Future Week, I'd ask you all join me in thanking the fantastic Politico events and summits team who have done such amazing work, and they've promised me a free cocktail outside for plugging them.
If you say it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So thank you to them. I'd like to ask you all just to remain seated for a few minutes, and Corey will be back on to close proceedings.